Now we will bring this back to council for discussion. So can we get the timer, the 5-minute timer? Wonderful. That's back. So we will go around in 5-minute increments and hopefully nobody will need longer than that. I have a couple of questions. Number one, and I'll go through them and then you can answer. How do you determine what are the bird sensitive areas versus the non-bird sensitive areas? Somebody mentioned about limiting outdoor lighting to 100 watts. Now, you can't measure light intensity with watts. I mean, that was the old incandescent light bulbs. You measure it with lumens or by candela, because different lighting sources have vastly different amounts of lumens per watt. So I'd like to see a better definition than trying to use watts, which is not accurate. I heard about Shawnee Kleinhouse's comment regarding 2,700 degrees Kelvin for the lighting. I don't know enough about that. Maybe our city staff or public works can mention if that's practical. I wondered how other cities, there were several other cities mentioned how their retail deals with the reduced lighting from dark skies, if it actually does impose any burden on them. And then I agree with the resident Kitty Moore who mentioned string lighting. It is true that many people do attach string lighting to their fences in their backyard, pools, whatever. And I wonder if we could do something about ensuring that that is still allowed. So those were my 5 things. If staff could address those. And thank you.
Yeah, so let us sort of address that one section at a time, the birthday versus the dark sky. I'll just very quickly talk about the Kelvin levels. Obviously, I'm not a lighting professional here, but the Kelvin determination is basically the warmth, temperature of the light that's emitting. So the lower, the higher the number, obviously, the whiter and the colder and cooler it looks. The more white, more bright. The lower the number, the warmer it looks. So in terms of the question about 2,700 versus 3,000 or whatever number, that really depends on the retailer and the type of retail that it provides. Generally speaking, if you go to any retail, you notice that maybe the dressing rooms are a little bit lighter than, say, a jewelry store, right? Jewelry store will have a higher Kelvin because of the goods and services, the goods that they're trying to provide. So generally, that's sort of where the Kelvins come in, and depending on the type of retail, they'll have a different preference. Then Eric, maybe you can speak a little bit more on the remainder of the dark sky questions.
Yeah, so we did speak with some jurisdictions who have already implemented dark sky ordinances. In their implementation of the ordinances, they didn't really see too much of an issue. We spoke to, particularly remembering talking to Portola Valley, Malibu, and San Luis Obispo, and they've had their ordinances on the book for quite some time now, and pretty much everyone, like a better term, kind of falls in line with it. They don't see it being too big of an issue. If you go to like downtown San Luis Obispo and their shopping developments, you can see that the lighting's been still pretty active, still pretty well lit, and has a pretty active downtown and commercial areas. In regards to the street lighting to fences, we saw that in another jurisdiction. Really, the intent there is just to kind of prevent the spillover. One of the big things with the proposed lighting regulations is to limit light spillage. While we're trying to balance outdoor lighting for the string lights, we're trying to manage those expectations with obtrusive lighting effects to the neighbors, but that can definitely be changed to allow for that. And the outdoor lighting to 100 watts, we can update that. We can come back with a more accurate number. The wattage is something that was referenced to the security lighting systems that's currently in our hillside ordinance. So we lifted it from there as part of our current regulations.
Right. Yeah. I mean, 100 watts of LED lighting is, a lot brighter than 100 watts of incandescent lighting. And
Correct.
this has been an issue with automobile headlights as well, because the transportation department used to list things in watts and they go, wow, well, if we use HID lighting or LED lighting, we get a huge amount of light for the same number of watts. So yeah, please measure it with the right units. That's very important in engineering. And I guess the question I didn't get answered was, how do we determine what's a bird sensitive area versus a non-bird sensitive area?
Yeah, I think Q will be able to answer that.
Yes, Eric, essentially bird sensitive areas are those that are within 300. It's a defined term in the code. It's a new definition that we're adding. It essentially is, I'm going to read.
I'll share the screen, Q.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Means parcels that are in or within 300 feet of the wildlife urban interface, which is essentially the high fire severity areas.
Oh, okay. All right. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm done.
Perfect.
All right. Who would like to go next?
I'm happy to.
Okay, go ahead, Rod.
So, what outreach was done to the business and development community? I noted from the packet that we had 2 meetings in February. Who attended from the business community at those?
So we did send postcards out to all addresses in the city. I don't have the exhaustive list in front of me. It was different groups of people. We did reach out to a couple of businesses in the city and developers to kind of get their take on the proposed ordinance. Generally, they were fine with the ordinance as long as things were being consistently applied to everyone. They did mention making sure that critical areas were illuminated appropriately and kind of looking for uniformity of lighting standards, so they're not going back and forth. And then they were also concerned with conforming or existing non-conforming lightings should the ordinance be passed.
What if we're on a block with some businesses that want to be open late, other businesses that would close earlier, say conventional retail, but you have a dining establishment or a bar or something sandwiched between a bunch of retail that would then have to have its lights off, right? You couldn't have lights, if I understand the proposal here correctly. Would we then be isolating a place and a destination, making it feel uncomfortable or unsafe for patrons?
No. So what we included in the language is that outdoor lighting is to be extinguished by 11 p.m., which is where our late night hours start, or when people are no longer present in exterior areas, whichever is later. So we are talking.
When what did you say?
Whenever, or when people are no longer present in exterior areas, whichever is later. So let's say a bar is open to midnight or 1, and there needs to be lighting to and from. We would look at the lighting as a whole with that permit when it comes in to have that later night activity.
Yeah, I mean, just listening to some of the conversations here, I really wonder how effective our outreach was, and I'm uncomfortable moving forward. I will state with that because I want buy-in from our small businesses. We struggle so and mightily to get good retail and dining. We want vibrant late night places and destinations. And if they're not bought into this yet, I think we need to go back and do more homework on that.
One thing to note too is that these are a lot of.
Did I understand you to say that we would require a permit to replace? Did I understand you to say that we would require a permit to replace one kind of lighting with another? For example, moving from incandescents to LEDs?
No, but we're looking at the light fixture.
Okay, so if I have an LED fixture and I had an incandescent fixture, I replace the fixtures, do I need a permit for that?
No,
What are the conditions under which I would need a permit for lighting then?
when you remove the light fixture itself as a whole, when you replace the unit.
If I may, Councilmember Sinks.
Yeah.
If you're installing a brand new lighting fixture, which does not have any electrical lines to it, that's when you need a building permit. If you have an existing lighting fixture and all you're doing is replacing it, you do not need a building permit for that, but you do have to adhere to certain requirements. And that's what we're wanting to make sure. The other thing I just wanted to clarify is that many of these standards are existing within our code today. And so businesses do have to adhere to these requirements. So there are only a few requirements that are essentially quote unquote new. So I did want to point that out.
Okay, I see my 5 minutes has expired, so I'd like to take another 5 minutes at some point and talk about residential lighting. But I'll yield back my time for now.
Yeah, I think it works well. We just go around, each take 5 minutes until
Yeah,
we
good enough.
run out.
But I do want to
Okay.
talk. I do want to talk about resident lighting in
Okay.
residential areas too. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Leon. Would you like to go now?
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, I'd like to thank Shani and her colleagues for advocating for this bird safe and night sky ordinance. And I'd like to thank this council for supporting it and the staff and planning commission for working together on this. This is very complex. I'm trying to understand it. And so let me clarify, does this ordinance apply to existing buildings, existing businesses? Say we adopt it today, and what kind of adjustment they will need to make?
None at this
None,
time.
right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't affect any existing business.
Correct.
That's good to know. So it's only for new buildings. I'd say if a new business comes in an existing building, they will have to go through the usual permit process. And do they have additional requirement that they didn't have to comply before they need to comply with now?
The only thing would be if they replace fixtures.
So if they come into an existing space and they don't make any change in the lighting fixture, this ordinance would not affect them.
Correct. As long as they're not proposing any new lighting fixtures, they'll be fine.
And if they are replacing that, the existing ordinance would require them to get a permit anyway.
They would have to get some sort of permit, and there's already like energy codes that kind of already limit lighting to a certain extent as well.
Okay, that's good to know. So, and then, so I think some of how about this applies to external lighting? So for example, in a shopping center, maybe like mentioned, most of the businesses do close by say 10 o'clock, but one might open until 12 or 2 o'clock. Then would the entire shopping center be dark outside except this business will be light inside, or the shopping center will be allowed to keep the light on outside exterior too?
We would look at that as a whole, but they would be allowed to have lighting on, but let's say it's a portion of the development that is off, like no longer operating, that's kind of isolated, and the lighting would be dimmed, and it could go to motion sensors and security lighting, and then that particular use that's operating later can have its lights, and then potentially the pathway to parking or critical areas that would be lit, so they can have safe and secure access.
So that's what we would like to see in the future, but the existing shopping malls don't have this kind of automatic on-off switch, so they won't have to make that switch now, right?
Correct.
So this new ordinance would only apply to new shopping centers, and they would then have to comply with this new standard.
Correct.
Okay. And then if it's turned on and off with motion sensor, I was concerned about safety in terms of people do have to walk through a dark area to reach a business. So the motion sensor should still be able to light the path, right?
Correct. And we also have that light can be on when there are people present to help light as well, to be lit as
Okay.
well.
And then another issue people have complained over the years is the bright light from, say, business buildings like Apple Infinity Group. There were residences behind the building. The building is long light all night long for security reasons, I heard. So would this ordinance apply to those buildings?
If it, not to the existing buildings, but to new fixtures or new building, it would apply.
So it would not even apply to Apple Infinity building that's keeping it all night long right now. But if it were a new building at the same place, they would have to turn the light off at night.
Correct, or dim them to when people are no
Dim
longer.
them. So dim them to what is the level they have to dim it to?
I'm sorry, I should
They
say.
don't have to turn it off all, just dim them enough
Yeah,
to a certain standard.
yeah, they would turn them off unless there's certain areas, like for security lighting that need to be lit, or critical areas of illumination that need to be lit. So not the whole thing, but certain portions could be allowed to exceed.
That's good.
On.
So would we be encouraging existing buildings to comply with the new standard, even though they don't have to, but then we are encouraging them to?
Well, I will say, Councilmember Chow, we're always encouraging for businesses and owners and homeowners to comply with the current code. We're always encouraging, but it's not a requirement at the moment.
Yeah. Okay, great. Is my 5 minutes up?
Minutes is up, so let's move
Yeah,
on.
okay.
Darcy, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. I think these are very thoughtfully crafted and environmentally conscientious proposals. And I think that, I actually watched all of the planning meetings on this. They had many hours of consideration, and I really appreciate all the work that was done there to consider all the various facets of this topic. I do support the proposed draft ordinance for first reading. I know that there is a significant safety exemption or exemptions, and given the opportunities to put forth tangible data to quantify any commercial concerns, in the absence of such data at this point, I will be supporting the draft ordinance for enactment. And if there is data in the future that supports these qualitative assertions, I'd be happy to re-examine that with regard to how we, perhaps modify the ordinance. But I'll state again that there's been a lot of time and effort, from our staff, most included, and the Planning Commission put into this item. I did see that the issues were discussed in meticulous detail, and I find the data presented compelling. If I can share my screen, I will put in an indication of what I would suggest as the one modification that I'd have, and that would be to the draft string lighting regulation. So 19.102.040B, I think given the other provisions for ensuring that the string lighting isn't visible, for example, from the city's right of way, which is here, it shall not be visible from the city right of way, for instance. I think it would be fine to delete this A2 subsection provision of not allowing these string lights to be installed or attached to fences. So I would put forth the draft ordinance as written with the deletion of this this one subpoint.
So Darcy, my concern there, I can see not attaching it to the tops of fences. But I think it should be allowed if you're installing it, say, a couple of feet down from the top of an 8-foot fence would not cause a problem. But just saying attached to fences is kind of vague. I think it's. I can understand why you might not want someone, attached. The neighbor probably doesn't want it either, attached to the top of a fence where it bleeds light into the neighbor's yard. So, I would say that there should be some kind of limitation to attaching it to fences, but not a blanket prohibition.
What one thing to note too is the attached to fences applies to both residential and commercial areas. So if the council would like to differentiate between the two, and to also note that fences can sometimes be transparent, wrought iron fences, not necessarily.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I didn't think of that. That's a good point. Yeah, that section may need a little more work there. Right. You wouldn't want it to attach to a wrought iron fence where it bleeds over into the next property.
Is there a provision right now for making sure that it's not visible from the next property? I guess it's not, they're not visible from the city right of way.
We carved out essentially the string lights, so it kind of would still be able to be visible, but we can add some language, or we can work on some language to limit that, so that outdoor string lights shall be, if attached to the fence, prohibited from limiting the neighbor too much or something like that. We can work on some language for that.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want that to hold up the first reading, though. I mean, is that something that we could?
If I may, Councilmember Paul?
Sure.
Maybe some language that we could write in would be to suggest that it could be attached to a solid board wooden fence or something like that, to make sure that it's not attached to fences and hillsides or wrought iron fences, so that it kind of bleeds over into the neighboring yard.
Right. To say that it needs to be attached to the property owner's side of a non-visible or a solid fence.
Solid board or a wooden, or
Well, not just wooden. It could be concrete.
Right.
I don't want to get into that, but could be concrete or
It's a
plastic.
solid fence.
Yeah, solid. Just say solid fence.
Correct.
Yeah, right. Not wrought iron, not chain link, etc.
Would you like this to apply to both residential and commercial, or just one or the other?
Would the council be okay with the lighting adjacent to a residential property in commercial areas?
I don't see any reason not to make it consistent between residential and commercial in terms of the limitations. I mean, if it's a commercial area next to a residential area, then you would still have that consideration with regard to your neighbors. So yeah, I mean, I would vote to make it consistent.
Yeah, I mean, what do other cities do with this?
They vary. I think one city had the particular about most cities were silent on string lighting. One city did prohibit, actually, no, I take that back. Most cities were silent on this, and I think the one did allow for it.
Okay.
And several only allowed it in commercial areas, not in residential areas.
You mean the string lightings attached to fences, they are allowed in commercial areas?
String lighting per se was just only limited to commercial areas, but in terms of the fencing, right, one allowed it, others didn't.
I see.
All right.
Yeah, those are my comments. I mean, if we
All right. Let's go on to John then, and then we'll circle back. I had one more comment as well. I forgot. Go ahead,
Okay.
John.
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad to see that these are coming to us, that we get to decide what, if anything, needs to be changed. I am real happy to hear Councilman Paul say that he actually heard the review by the Planning Commission, because that gives us another level of review that we can feel went along with these. So that's good. So I'm going to switch over to the bird safe windows and just kind of touch on those. On the one slide, it said that there's a small exception for residential. I'm not sure if you could pop that slide up, but it said that for commercial, there was like a exception of 5 to 10%. 10% if it's from 0 to X height, and then 5% if it's above that. And then there was a line that said small. So residential development in R1 zoning districts outside of the bird sensitive areas. But I would still be a little bit concerned because we do still have a lot of hillside houses in residential. And the residential type window versus these highly reflective commercial buildings. And so I'm a little bit concerned that we're putting too big of an envelope or too big of an umbrella. On the one hand, it also said that windows with bug screens, well, all windows that open on residential have the bug screen. But the problem is half of the window is not operable and half of the window is. And so, what would that mean for people, putting new windows into their house? Obviously, they don't want two different types of windows. So if they're forced to have it on the non-operable section of glass, then they've got to have it on the other one, even though there's a screen there. So I'd like a little consideration of that, or if it's already covered in some way, feel to just go ahead and update me on what I'm missing there.
So the window treatment, the bird safe treatment, can be several things. It could also be window muntins, which are the actual the lines that you see on windows. It could also be literally film that gets put on the windows. It could be etching on the windows.
Yeah, I'm not sure we really want to burden residential, people. I mean, going from the old style windows and putting in new windows requires a permit. And, I'm not sure we want to burden the residential houses with that. Again, the highly reflective commercial ones versus, how much reflection is there on, just regular residential windows? I mean,
it actually is pretty reflective, particularly because people have backyards and they do have other, landscaping in the front. They have landscaping at the back. It does get pretty vegetated at the end of the day. But with regard to the slide that you were looking at, Councilmember Willie, those are actually exempt. The homes outside of those bird sensitive areas, they're exempt from having to apply these regulations.
oh, so even the hillside houses and stuff.
No, so the hillside houses are within bird sensitive areas, and so
That's
they
what I
would
thought.
have to apply some sort of bird safe treatment. It's the R1, the homes in the R1 areas outside of the bird sensitive areas, those are all exempt.
See, so on that previous slide, the commercial, and it said, well, there's allowed 10% of the window to not be bird safe up to particular height, and then 5% above that. Noting that the higher it goes, the more likely the bird would be flying in a fast way. There you go, 10% ground to 60 and 5% above 60. And so here again, residential houses, I mean, we're down at, 0 to 12 feet. And so I am a little bit concerned about the umbrella that we're putting out and capturing a little bit too much. I mean, what would be the percentage allowed for residential, 0 to 12 feet? And using this one size fits all, I think is troubling for me. I fully agree. Bird safe design, yes. Maybe if you could talk about just a real brief statement, how much in the way of bird strikes do residential houses have versus these very tall, highly reflective commercial buildings? I mean, really, is it that big? I've never heard of a bird strike at my house, but maybe they've occurred.
So I hate to put myself on the spot, but I've had a bird strike. I've had a couple of bird strikes on my own property, but that aside, there is this standard is pretty standard for communities that have bird safe regulations, and I do believe that maybe the Audubon Society can help us answer that question as well. Again, this particular standard that we've included in this ordinance is fairly standard for all the bird safe regulations that we saw that we studied.
Okay.
So
I don't want to use, yeah, I don't want to use up all my time on that, but I am concerned for the lighting. I'm not really hearing much about the different types of lighting and how they are or aren't covered. The traditional street lighting was very bright white, and it's been changed to, kind of a yellowish color. And then in like shopping centers, a lot of them, the lights are shining down versus a lot of them that shine up. And so I would tend to think that that should be a factor. If the commercial building is trying to light up the sky and draw in traffic from all over the Bay Area, that, go to Santana Row because the sky's lit up, is very different than, providing, the safety and lighting to show that the business is open for business and, there's plenty of safety there. And so I'm not hearing that. Is there a distinction between the different types of, the yellow light versus the white light, the shining it up versus shining it down? And
So yeah, so definitely for so the color we're looking at is more an amber color with the Kelvin temperature of 3000. And then with regards to the lighting up and down, the big thing that we focused on is that lights should be pointed downwards, shielded to prevent any glare, and lit to light the appropriate area. So not spilling over, just really focused on what it's supposed to be lit. And so this slide here kind of shows what we're talking about for acceptable, unacceptable lighting. And the big thing you'll notice is that with acceptable lighting, you just don't see the bulb. They're shielded, and that helps to focus the light to the area, not to the sky.
so does this get covered in our new ordinance that we're being proposed?
Yes.
Or is this covered in the existing municipal code? If somebody were to change the lighting at, say, United Furniture or something, and decided he wanted to make it brighter to serve his marketing needs, would he be allowed to do that or not?
So are you asking if under the current lighting they could just light upwards?
Yes. Does that already cover, that the picture that you showed, is that already covered in the municipal code? And if it's not, then shouldn't we kind of put that in there so that we allow more lighting of a controlled type?
We do have it referenced in our ordinance, but it's more focused on the parking areas. That's where our lighting regulations live right now, is in those commercial parking areas, not necessarily like the pedestrian areas of a development.
So do those allow, again, if somebody were to say, wow, I want to light up, more of the area to let people know that are blocks away, they can't see, people coming in and out of the building, but they can clearly see, light shining upward and say, oh, okay, well, maybe I'll go over there. Now, that would be good for him, but it's contrary to what we're trying to do here. And that's where I'm trying to say, I would hope that we're trying to make it as helpful as possible to the establishments while still addressing the bright sky issue.
Right. Yeah, they would still be, they would still have similar guidelines. We currently have similar guidelines in place. And so it'd be, again, lighting the area, making sure that spillover isn't occurring. So it's not too big of a deviation from the standards. It's more of a clarification as to what they can do and how to light certain areas.
All right, can we go around again now? That's been way more than 5 minutes. So I had one other comment, and it was regarding the Planning Commission's suggestion, or I guess it's in the ordinance, exempting affordable housing from the bird safe design and dark skies. I would be opposed to this. When you're building a new building, it's not exceedingly expensive to do bird safe design. I mean, a new building, you can build that in. You're not retrofitting anything. And here's the deal. For our next RENA cycle of 2023 to 31, if we were to possibly meet our RENA requirement for affordable housing in the next cycle, it would require some tall buildings, some state or federally subsidized housing projects with tall buildings that would have a lot of windows. And I think, a tall building, is a great target for bird strikes. And for those buildings, I think we should be building in bird safe design to those new buildings. So I totally disagree with exempting affordable housing projects from bird safe design. The other question I never really got answered was about reducing from Kelvin 3000 to Kelvin 2700. Is that practical or not? So could the staff answer those two?
So I'll answer the Kelvin. So we don't see it being an issue. We've seen, I think, in ordinances where they do mention Kelvin, it's 3000 or less. So going to a 2700 doesn't seem to be something that is out of the ordinary, I suppose.
Right. I mean, Shawnee Kleinhaus brought that up, and I mean, I don't know enough about it to, make a decision, but apparently, the people from Audubon do have that knowledge, and I would defer to them if it's not going to make a huge difference in terms of the quality of the lighting. But I mean, my real thing was, if we're going to be building tall, affordable housing structures, they should be bird safe as well. And I mean, do we have any idea what the cost adder is to making a new building bird safe? Is there any cost adder at all?
Sure, I can answer that. So we did a little bit of research in terms of what the typical costs are. So usually the typical cost for a curtain wall without any bird safe treatment is between $100 and $200 a square foot, just depending, that includes glass, framing, installation, and things like that. We did a little bit of research and found that fritting, which is just the etching and marking on the glass, will cost approximately $5 a square foot. And so it would add about 2.5% to 5% to that curtain wall cost, which we thought was not enormous. Additionally, the UV glazing adds approximately $12 to $15 a square foot, and which would result in about an added 8 to 10% to the curtain wall cost. Now, of course, this was, based on our conversations with two companies, and every development might use a different form of bird safe treatment. So we weren't sure. That's like the basic that we researched.
Does adding the UV glazing also give other benefits to the housing units that are in the building?
It certainly could from other aspects.
I mean, from energy saving and that sort of thing. And what about in like double pane windows where you have those fake grids inside? Does that qualify as a bird safe treatment?
So it has to be attached to the exterior of the glass, not to the interior. And that is also another clarification that the Audubon Society wishes to add, and that's in their letter as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. Thank you. Those are my other two questions. Who's next now? Is it Rod again?
Happy to go again.
Yeah.
So I borrowed this, a lighting fixture in my neighborhood. very common these days. People are, doing what we're asking them to. They're removing their lawns and putting in, new low water gardens and things. So when they do that, very often they're not replacing their wiring anymore. They're opting for a design like this. It has a solar collector on top. It has a battery in the back, and it charges the battery during the day. And when the sun goes down, the light stays on. Could be through the night, or it could be till 2 a.m., or it could be 1 a.m. My understanding is if we go ahead with this ordinance, these things would immediately be illegal in the city. Is that correct? That's a question to somebody in planning staff.
I'm sorry.
Can you answer, please?
Yeah, they would, if they went past the 11 o'clock and they weren't on timers, they would be prohibited, correct?
Okay, so I would say the last 10 years, these things have been commonly sold. Costco, Amazon, and commonly installed. What are we going to tell residents who have made this investment if we go ahead with this?
If the council sees fit, we can add an exemption for these particular types of solar light path lighting. We considered that, and I think Eric might have some language if the council wishes to add that as an exemption.
And just to be clear, the regulations only apply to new additions of new lighting. So these would not require people to pull out lighting they've installed prior to the effective date of the ordinance.
Yeah.
Who's going to enforce all of this new regulation? I mean, if one neighbor rats on another, is somebody going to say, well, I want to see the receipt for your lighting fixture? I mean, really? How's this going to work, folks?
Code enforcement, Councilmember Sinks, in our city is by complaint. It's complaint driven. So
we're going to spend our code enforcement dollars blocking these things. I mean, when my daughter comes home from late night, and sometimes she's working very late, she comes home past 11 p.m. Am I to have all the lights off unless I bother to install something that has a motion sensor? These things are no longer available to me. Is that what we're doing? Is that what we're talking about here?
Yes. I mean, it's we're open to what council feedback. We're happy to make any changes.
Is it fair to say that the street lights on the streets outside most of our residential areas would continue to be lit all night?
Yes, as proposed.
Okay, so how about the lights on the Don Burnett Bridge?
Yes.
Okay, is it fair to say that there's probably 1,000 times more lumens coming out of a street light than one of these things?
Probably.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So honestly, I have some real issues with how well this has been thought through. I have real issues with the outreach to the business community. The last thing I want to do, especially at this time, is impair our relationship with the retail businesses that we'd really like to keep in Cupertino as opposed to migrating elsewhere. So my bottom line is I would be fine talking about the part of this which goes to bird safe design and new construction. But as for the rest of it, I think this needs much more outreach and needs to be thought through. And it is not our job to engineer things from the dais. The fact that, and I looked it up, yes, 100 watts is in the proposed new language. It struck one place, but it remains in another. I do not think we are ready for a first reading. And as sorry as it makes me to have to defer things to a future council where I have nothing to say, other than as a resident, I think this is half-baked. So that's where I stand tonight. Thank you.
Okay, Leon, would you like to go again? Do you have anything more?
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, I think Rod made some good points, although I would like this to move forward too. And so I do have some more questions. So, how about parking structures? Do we have anything different for parking structure? if it's attached to a commercial building with multiple businesses? How would that work?
Eric?
Sorry, keep unmuting myself. So we do have current regulations for parking structures that limit those lightings on the interior. The ordinance would impact any exterior lighting on a parking structure. So that would be covered in this ordinance.
Okay. So this ordinance doesn't cover the street light. Our street light will continue to.
Correct. It's something that we did look at, and we did speak to our public works department. It's kind of, it gets to a very gray zone because it's people are at nighttime driving, there's pedestrians, and so it's something that we exempted to ensure safety.
Okay. I think our street light is a lot brighter than the ones that's in Saratoga, for example. And so that's something maybe we should take a look. But in terms of backyard, our backyard is all automatic motion censored already. But we do, I mean, we have 2-story house, but then our 1st-story window had bird strike before, even in 1st story. And so I'm concerned about the exemption actually for all R1 zoning residential building. What if would they because the commercial building we exempt up to 15 feet. So what about 2nd-story buildings in R1 zoning? Because most of Cupertino is R1. So if we are concerned about bird safety, shouldn't we not exempt the 2nd-story windows also? Especially the new buildings tend to have much bigger windows.
It's certainly at council's discretion. We're happy to include that. Our original draft did not include any exemptions for single family homes. So this was based on input from the Planning Commission. We kind of formulated this particular requirement that you see tonight. We're happy to amend that as necessary.
So your first draft didn't exempt didn't exempt the residential in
outside of the bird safe areas,
and didn't exempt the 100% affordable housing, right?
Correct.
Those were added per Planning Commission recommendation.
Correct.
Yeah, I kind of agree with the mayor that 100% affordable. They can decide to use really big windows or they can choose not to. There are cheaper alternatives if they are really concerned about cost, right?
Correct. We
So
also
if they
have
use
a
window, they should do it bird safe way, I think. So I would support. How about other cities? Do they exempt R1 residential development?
no. They typically use a the height of the building. So typically it is that 0 to 60 feet and 60 feet and above. And so that's something that we kind of pulled into this as well. And but no, they do not exempt all single family.
60 feet.
So San Francisco does exempt some residential buildings. Yeah. And
I mean,
and Richmond does exempt some residential buildings.
Okay. I mean, everyone knows I don't live in bird safe area. I live near Walco, but we have birds nesting in our front yard, backyard, and we have bird nests in our front yard and backyard. So our 1st floor window had bird strike before, so this happens. Not only in bird safe area. So I wouldn't, if this applies only to new buildings, then I wouldn't rather not exempt residential and affordable housing. And then regarding the 5 requests from the Sierra Club, I think the first one makes sense that to add protection of human health to the purpose statement, that it's important to have human health. I actually like walking around in Saratoga because they don't have a lot of street light at night, and it's a lot better for looking at stars. Yeah. And the second request they have is strengthen the compliance treatment. That the glass treatment should be visible to all bird species, have high color contrast with glass, and be applied to exterior first surface of the glass. Does the staff have any concern about their request?
No, this is a valid recommendation. It's up to the council to decide if they wish to add this in. We're
Okay.
happy to add that in.
So this is reasonable. And then the third one, I missed the third one. Where's the third one? The third one is the critical areas that the current language exempt critical areas to have a higher illumination, but didn't define how high. So they would like to be more specific, right?
Right, this is an existing requirement, and Eric can go into that a little bit.
Yeah. As Pew mentioned, this is an existing requirement, and this is also put in place in case there was a conflict with the building code. They do have certain illumination standards, and we just didn't want to conflict with those requirements.
So is it possible to, or does it make sense to define what's higher, maybe 20% more than the current code or something?
It would be difficult to pinpoint that because it does vary based off the area and the surrounding uses and kind of there's different elements to look at. I'm not sure if a general number would necessarily be adequate.
So
I think their recommendation is we believe, they say from their letter, 10-foot candles is more than sufficient to light critical areas. So is it possible that we set a standard, and if anyone do need a higher illumination, then they can always apply for a permit, right?
We could add some language that says that it's limited to a 10-foot candle unless it conflicts with building code or any other state, safety.
So
safety.
can I interrupt here for a minute? It's like we're rewriting this whole ordinance from the dais. As Rod stated, that's not really what we're here for. And like Rod, I will not be here, after this meeting and won't get to vote on this, but I don't think we are nearly ready to even do a first reading on this.
I think our purpose as council is to provide some adjustment. We are not here to rubber stamp. We are never here to rubber stamp.
Right, but
So
there's just too many here.
Public comments, right? And
Right.
these are minor changes. These are not really significant changes.
Well, I mean, the whole point of an ordinance is to get it right, all the details, the first time and not having to keep coming back and amend it. And I just don't think, this is ready yet. There's just too many little changes here that we're trying to put in, and we don't even have all, we're getting vague assertions like, yes, we checked with the business and it didn't appear to materially affect it, but we don't have any real data here. I'm not ready to vote in favor of this.
We don't have data on what?
On, what the impact on businesses will be.
We know
Rod,
that it doesn't affect any of the existing ones, right?
what do you mean?
It would certainly affect the hours of operation. If everything has to be out at 11 p.m., that's what I understand.
Yeah, and Rod raised another good point is, we're going to do all this, and yet the streetlights are all still illuminating things, far greater. I did look at those pathway lights. There are, the pathway lights can be purchased motion activated, so they only turn on, when there's somebody approaching the path. I don't think that is such a big deal for new installations to use the motion activated ones. But I mean, I don't know. For me, I would bring this back to a future meeting once it's a little more well researched and well defined.
So what data do you need? I still don't understand. I
Well, I
think
already
the staff did a lot of research.
Yeah, there's
Well,
been
explain why we should have streetlights illuminated at night, all night long, if they're 1,000 times or even more powerful than what folks use in their residences to feel safe and comfortable. For example.
I mean, I'm also thinking maybe separate the bird safe design and the lighting regulations into two separate things,
I agree
because
with
they are
that.
separate.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would be good with moving forward with a bird safe design. I'm much more concerned about how thoughtfully the rest of it's been, the night sky, the dark ordinance
Dark
has been
sky.
thought through.
Yeah, I think I would also toss out that for the
Yeah.
lighting, that it actually was really don't use one brush to paint everything. The heavily commercial area versus residential, and maybe even a transitional one area in between, and they each have their own rules. So
Yeah, I support the dimmer light for the street light also. So we separate the two. How about the exemptions? So for bird safe, do we have a consensus that we don't exempt residential development and affordable housing?
Well, yeah, I
Because the
mean, I
majority
don't know if
of
we
the
have a
city
consensus.
is
I don't know
residential.
why the planning
Okay.
commission decided to exempt affordable housing. I mean, given the relatively low cost difference in construction and other benefits you get from the window glazing in terms of energy use reduction, I wouldn't. I mean, I can't speak for them. I'm not sure why they thought that was necessary.
Maybe this should have been like, okay, here's a recommendation. Here are some questions. Some staff reports are framed this way. Here are some questions that we'd like council to decide.
so can
But
I
now this is the way it is, so that we can say if we want to make some
so
yeah.
it doesn't sound like it's ready. So can I suggest we table the discussion? I think we've gotten a lot of input from council. And we'll discuss the changes that need to be made to both pieces. I think we can separate them out as well. They are separate. And then we'll bring it back.
I would say that's separate bird safe and the night sky. And can we just go forward with bird safe one? Do we have?
Oh, no, the
issues
ordinance
with
is
that?
written with both in it. To sit up here and try to separate
Okay.
it out, I wouldn't want to start
That's true.
doing that. As much as I would like to participate in this, I still, I think the future council will give it, the same consideration that we did and, make a good decision.
Then at least we need to get some consensus on the things we have talked about today, so the staff has direction on what modifications to make, right?
I'm not sure what consensus you're looking for. Is
Things
it on the
you-
affordable housing or what?
Yeah, things you mentioned, Darcy mentioned, and about string light, about the exceptions. Do we want to get?
So I think they
consensus on those?
I think they already took our comments about string lights into account. The affordable housing, I don't know if we have consensus or not. I mean, I would certainly not favor excluding it from the glazing regulations or the window treatment regulations.
I also agree that, we're going with taller buildings. It needs to be included, so.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing, maybe there should be something in here, related to a building over a certain number of stories or a certain number of feet high, requiring the bird safe design, where maybe a 2-story row home, doesn't require it, but a 22-story tower does, because that's going to have, more likelihood of the bird strikes. But I mean, I don't, I'm not going to sit up here and write the ordinance.
Okay, but then we still need to go through all the comments people have mentioned so that we can give direction. So regarding the 5 requests from Sierra Club, and I mentioned 1, 2, 3. The 3, so the staff, I think that 1, 2, 3 are staff think are reasonable, right? They can be integrated later. And the 4th one is the one about the 27 Klein, the color temperature limit.
Right. And I think that was,
3,000. So they think it's reasonable also.
yeah.
Okay, so that can be included in. And then the 5th one is they would like we to direct the staff to work with Santa Clara or Audubon Society to create an annual review list of bird safe treatments, because these changes over time. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure about that one. If,
How
we're ceding the authority to,
we're not
to a
ceding.
private club.
We're not ceding. I think it's like they are acting, providing free consultation to our staff, because they don't have time to follow all the current trend. So annually they can provide some information to the staff.
So
Well, of course they don't get to decide, right? Or the staff still gets to decide.
can I
Yeah, go ahead, Deb.
I just think we have enough direction. We have the letter. We can go through it, and we'll bring it back separated so that council can consider them separate.
Right, and maybe meet with the council members that will be deciding before it's brought back, so you
Yep.
can get all this stuff in here. And
We'll get it together. Yep.
okay.
So
Because
I
now we're like 45 minutes over, and we have another item,
Right, I understand.
Okay.
I do have one final question regarding specifically about some strikeouts in the section under general commercial zoning that we have striked out on the section for exterior lighting, off-site glare, parking lots. So let me share.
Those were not strikeouts. Those were actually being carried into the new chapter that was being proposed.
Okay.
So these are removed from this section because they will be moved to another section.
They were being moved to the dark sky section.
Okay. Oh, okay, shall meet the requirements of 19102. Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Great work.
Okay, so do we need a motion to postpone this to a future meeting?
No, I think we can just take no action, right?
Okay, all right, let's just, okay,
No, I'm going to move to continue this item to December 15th. I think we should make a decision on it sooner rather than later. We're pretty much there. I disagree with not voting on this tonight, but it doesn't seem like there would be other votes to pass. I would be willing to pass it as recommended by staff, but I would like to move that we continue this item to December 15th to a date certain and the nearest date that we can put it on the agenda. And I'd like to ask that someone second that
I
motion.
second that.
Thank you.
I would like to see this pass as soon as possible too.
I'd like to call that question. Thank you.
All right, go ahead and conduct a roll call, Kirsten.
Well, I'm sorry, but you would need votes to do that, and I have a question on this.
I'd like to call the
How
question.
long does,
If there are 4 votes to call the question, then we can.
yeah,
call-
you can, so let's see if you have 4 votes to call the question and not have my question of staff answered. That would be fine with me.
I think you've achieved what you've already wanted to achieve tonight. So I'd like to call the question. Thank you.
Okay, Kirsten.
Councilmember Chow?
Wait a minute. I'm sorry, but it's out of order. If you want to make a motion to call the question, you can do that. But I have a question of staff before we conduct this roll.
No, fine. Then ask if you have 4 council members to call the question. I'd
Well,
like.
no, that would be you asking for 4 votes. to
Oh,
call
you
the
know what?
question.
Just, Ron, just ask your question. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
My question is, given the input that we've given you tonight and the outreach that, in my view, would be necessary to conduct with the business community, how long realistically does staff need to answer the questions that have been posed by the public and council members this evening? Is December 15th realistic?
Well, I think that the key comes into the outreach part, right? If council is thinking
Yes.
about sort of re-notice, reach out to the business community, then that we will need a little more time on that. I will say that this item was brought up at the monthly legislative action committee and share that with the chamber. So there was some notification there. But it just depended on the extent of noticing that an outreach at council, which is for
No,
staff
I
to
would-
really initiate.
I mean, I wouldn't, yeah, the businesses had plenty of time to comment on this. Just, if they chose not to, that is not the problem of the planning commission or the city council. They had plenty of notice. So 2 more weeks to make these minor things should be sufficient. I mean,
I want to renew my request to call the question. Can we?
all right,
For 4 council members to agree to call the question.
okay.
I agree.
Kirsten, why don't you ask if we can conduct a vote if there's 4 council members to call the question?
Councilmember Chow?
So what are we voting on? So
Do
Whether
you
we want
support
to
calling the
continue.
question?
whether we want to call the question?
Have a vote. Do you support having a vote?
I
Right.
would like to have the vote.
It's a motion to cut off the further debate and questions of staff is what it is.
Right, calling the question ends the discussion for now.
You need,
Okay.
you need 4 people to call the question. So the question to you is, do you agree to call the question and have a vote? And the vote would be on a motion to continue this to December 15th. We're not voting on the substance of anything before us here.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, I think we had enough discussion. Yeah.
So you're voting aye.
Aye.
Councilmember Sinks?
No,
Councilmember Willie?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Paul?
Yes, call the question.
Mayor Scharf?
Aye.
So there are 4 in support to call the question.
I'll reiterate the motion, and Councilmember Chow seconded it, and that was to continue this item until December 15th. That's it.
At which time we could ask those additional questions from Councilman Sinks.
Yes, and hopefully some of those questions will be answered insofar as tabling it until a nebulous degree of outreach has been conducted. A postcard has been sent to every address in the city, and this has been going on since February. And there has been plenty of outreach, abundant amounts of outreach. And so, having apparently been the only person watching the entirety of the Planning Commission hearings on this, I can tell you that this has been gone over with a fine-tooth comb in granular detail, and people have had more than ample opportunity to comment on this. So thank you very much.
well, you asked to close off debate, and all I will tell you is I sure didn't sense that from the public input this evening. So I will be voting no on the main motion.
I guess we sense different things. Great. Thanks very much.
Okay. So is there a motion and a second then?
So would you like me to continue with with Vice Mayor Paul's motion for a vote?
Right, the motion to continue it to December 15th. Yes.
Councilmember
Vote.
Chow,
Aye.
Councilmember Sinks,
No?
Councilmember Willie,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Paul,
Aye.
Mayor Sharp,
Aye.
motion carries with Sinks voting no.
Wow. Okay. We are on to item 12, updated administrative procedures within the community funding grant policy. Can we have the staff report?
Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, go.
Great. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of the City Council. I am Joanne McGreeny, Director of the Parks and Recreation Department. Tonight, I will be presenting the proposed changes to the Community Funding Grant Program policy. The main reason this item is before you this evening is to move the application deadline for this program to an earlier date. The agenda tonight includes the purpose, the background of the policy, the current procedure, recommended revisions and fiscal impact, the proposed procedure, reporting requirements, nonprofit support website, Parks and Recreation Commission feedback, and recommended action. The purpose of the Community Funding Grant Program is for the City of Cupertino to provide funding to local nonprofit organizations in the areas of social services, fine arts, and other programs for the general public. The policy provides a framework for the city's Community Funding Grant Program and guides the administration of the program and decision-making process. It also provides guidance on key aspects of the city's Community Funding Grant Program processes, including eligibility, evaluation criteria, restrictions, guidelines, and procedure. The Community Funding Grant Policy was adopted in fiscal year 2012-2013 and recently updated to include a funding cap of $20,000 per applicant and a tiered funding structure in January of 2020. In the current procedure, applications are available February 1st and due March 1st. Submitted applications are reviewed by staff for completeness and then sent to the Parks and Recreation Commission for review and evaluation of qualified applicants. In June, the City Council reviews the Commission's recommendations and determines the funding to approve, which is appropriated in the city's budget. The following fiscal year, grant recipients submit an annual project report describing how the funds were spent. Staff is recommending that the timeline be adjusted to make applications available January 1st and due February 1st. This timeline adjustment allows for the Parks and Recreation Commission to review and evaluate eligible applications over the course of 2 meetings. The first meeting will be an opportunity for the Commission to review the applications and ask any clarifying questions of the organizations. The second meeting will allow for commissioners to review their evaluations as a group and finalize recommendations for City Council. City Council will receive all eligible applications with the recommendations from the Parks and Recreation Commission. This provides City Council the opportunity to review all applications for consideration. Staff is recommending a funding range of $70,000 to $90,000 based on the 3-year average of previously awarded community grant funds. A funding range allows the Parks and Recreation Commission more guidance during their evaluation process. In the proposed procedure, applications will be available January 1st with a due date of February 1st. Submitted applications will be reviewed by staff for completeness and eligibility. The Parks and Recreation Commission will review and evaluate qualified applicants at their March and April meetings. In May and June, City Council will review the Commission's recommendations and determine the funding to approve, which will be appropriated in the city's budget. Provided in your desk items tonight are updates to attachments B and C, reflecting the change in administration of this policy from the Administrative Services Department to the Parks and Recreation Department. Annually, grant recipients submit a project report describing how their funds were spent. It is important to note that their project reports are not due until July of the following fiscal year. However, the application asks organizations to disclose how previously awarded funds have been spent. With applications due in February, some organizations' events or programs may have not occurred prior to the award of fiscal year grant funds. It is required that grant recipients still submit a written report to the Parks and Recreation Department to show how the grant funds have been spent for the purposes stated on the application. Reporting requirements include information about the number of persons served and other benefits to Cupertino. Supplemental to a written report are questions in the application form requiring clarification on collaboration with other organizations and financial or in-kind support currently or anticipated from the City of Cupertino. The Parks and Recreation Department is currently working on developing a nonprofit support website that will house 3 years worth of information regarding community festival fee waivers, community funding grants, sister city funding, out-of-cycle funding, and in-budget funding for nonprofits. This website is anticipated to go live as part of the January 1 application process. At a special meeting on November the 16th, the Parks and Recreation Commission reviewed the proposed updates and unanimously supported the new submission dates and the new program funding range. The recommended action is to review and adopt the updated administrative procedures within the community funding grant policy, including an earlier submission date for applications, program funding range, and affirmation that all qualified applicant materials will be brought to City Council for their review. I'm happy to take any questions at this time.
Okay, so I have one quick question. What happens in a case like this year where we were grant recipients who had funds awarded for specific projects? The projects did not take place because they couldn't, like all these festivals. Because of COVID, the festivals couldn't take place. Now, do they still get the money, or do they have to give it back, or how does that work?
There's been different scenarios just based on what the program or event specifically is. There has been a request for a program extension that will be being brought forward to you due to COVID. But there is a question on the budget form that asks if their event or program was impacted due to COVID and if their funds were spent. So in that respect, they would be expected to return the money, the funds.
Right, or use it next year if they,
Or ask for an extension.
not get the funding the next year. I'm sure we could find some place to use that money. That was the only question that I had on this.
Yeah, and you make a really good point that reminds me to just, remind people that the grants are essentially not for ongoing operations. It's to fund a specific event or a specific thing.
Right. It seems like some organizations come back every year and get, the grant every year, which is, not something I thought these should be for, but apparently it has been like that in the past. That was the only question I had on this. I think it is high time that we did update these procedures for the grants. Who would like to go next? Rod, do you have any comments? Or okay, John, go ahead.
Yeah. So the only question I had really was, I heard that move it from administrative services to Parks and Rec. Does that mean you need to have another person in Parks and Rec? Are we going to shift the person, or is it not that involved? Can you tell us how this is going to be administered in Parks and Rec? Are you already staffed to take care of this, or no?
Well, this will be my first rodeo, as they say. So I will be working through, the criteria that we use to evaluate their eligibility. We will be working through updating the evaluation sheet that the commission uses to rank these. It makes sense to have it in Parks and Recreation, considering that we coordinate with the commission for this program. But I think I would have a better answer for you after my first full year with actually carrying out the process. And the other thing that may be affected is how many people are requesting grant funds. So the administrative burden really comes down to how many different organizations submit applications. The application is 9 pages long. And so the more organizations that you have to vet, the more, cumbersome it is.
So maybe Christina could simply say, how many man hours a year does this typically require? So at least you'd have an idea of what type of staff, if you have enough or need more. I think we want to be very cautious about adding more staff.
Yeah, so I can comment on that briefly. And Joanne and I have been working, actually, I should introduce myself, Christina Alfaro, Director of Administrative Services. But Joanne and her team and my team have been working pretty closely. We've made some technological advances in the last year or so, setting up a grants portal that expedites the application process and the review of those applications. And so I don't anticipate, it's not a full body, it's not a full-time job to manage this application process. And we're a big team here at the City of Cupertino. So Joanne needs us to chip in and pick up the slack, or if something's running a little bit behind, we're more than happy to do that. I don't anticipate this being a position asked later down the line.
Great, that's all.
Okay, next. Rod, would you like to go?
Yeah, I'm fine with this. I mean, if staff thinks it's prudent to have more time to review these applications, I think it's all good that we review. And I will continue to maintain that the city ought to use its public funds collected through taxes of various kinds and fees to in a process where every grant to any nonprofit is carefully vetted through an appropriate and process and then sent through the commissions.
Okay. Thank you. Leon.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to do this a little earlier, but let's make sure that we do a widespread announcement about this so that people know the deadline is earlier this year. Yeah.
That's definitely on our radar, and we will make sure to reach out and let people know that it's a month earlier.
Yeah. And another thing that I'd like to bring up later is Historical Society. I didn't realize that's not considered part of the community grant program anymore because it's a separate funding in the line item. Then, yeah, I'll talk about that later. I think we need to talk about its accountability and transparency. Yeah.
Okay. John?
I already went. I was first.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, Darcy.
I have no comments. I support what's being recommended here. I think it's been an iterative process and it has improved over time. I would support what Councilmember Chow is pointing out in terms of having particular nonprofits that are singled out for disparate treatment. I think accountability is an important thing, so I wouldn't mind re-examining anything that would be classified as a line item on our regular budget back into this program in order to have more of a granular accountability as to how the funds are being spent.
Yeah, I think that is a good point, that Councilmember Chow made regarding the Historical Society. And it probably now with these revised guidelines, I think it should come back into that purview and have to apply for those fundings instead of being a line item. I did notice one thing in the revision. I don't know if it was there before about anything funded with these grants needs to be free of charge Cupertino residents. I know that was not the case in the past. There were several events that were funded that people had to pay to to get into. So, I mean, is there any time, can you think of any times when there might be an event that gets grant funding that it should not be free, that an admission would normally be charged? I mean, should that be in there, or should there be some possibility that an admission fee be charged?
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, I don't think that's actually part of the eligibility. It is asked in the application form if it is a charged event or a free event. So that's, up for consideration.
Okay. Oh, hold on. I'm looking at iLegislate here.
The eligibility only has 5 categories, and the funds,
Okay.
whether it's free or a charged event, is not part of the eligibility criteria. It's part of the application process, though.
Oh, it's for the application process, but
Correct.
so where was this part that said it needs to be free for Cupertino residents? Now I'm looking for it.
Yeah, I don't think it states that in the application for the actual grant funding. It does ask if there is, if the event is for charge, or will there be a charge or fee for the program, project, or event, or will the program be available to the entire community? So it only asks about whether or not there is a fee charge that you can use as part of your evaluation criteria in granting the funds.
Okay.
I think the mayor thinks it's written somewhere.
Yeah, I thought I saw it. I'm looking now.
I do see a restrictions guidelines section on
Right,
page
hold
2, the
Mayor,
third bullet.
If I could remind you, Right for Diabetes was a charged event. So it's okay if it's charged, because the funding does help them to lower the charge.
You're right.
Right.
Mayor.
I'm looking at the restrictions and guidelines where it says admission to or participation in the event must be, quote, free of charge, unquote, for Cupertino. Okay, unless stated in the application. Okay. So it doesn't have to be free, but if it's not going to be free, it just needs to be stated in the application. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Yeah, I don't have any objections to this. I would definitely, I mean, I guess I'll make a motion to adopt these updated administrative procedures. It's not an ordinance, right? Or,
Nope.
okay.
Okay.
So is there a second to adopt these updated administrative procedures?
Second.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Let's have a vote.
Councilmember Chow,
Aye.
Councilmember Sinks,
Yes?
Councilmember Willie,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Paul, Mayor Sharp,
Aye.
motion carries unanimously.
Okay, great. So there's no more oral communications. So we're on to council and staff comments. Does staff have any comments?
We do. If Roger's still on, he has a little update on VTA.
Oh,
I
great.
do.
Okay. Go ahead,
Yes.
Roger.
Yeah, no, good evening, Mayor. In addition to the mayor's comments regarding his letter to the VTA board, council did receive a memo update from staff on VTA Measure B allocation discussions. Yesterday, I did participate in a VTA Technical Advisory Commission ad hoc committee meeting. This was the first meeting where the VTA 10-year Measure B budget scenarios were discussed, and this will be the focus of the committee for the next month or so. Several agencies requested at this meeting a budget scenario that respects the 2016 Measure B promises made to voters. And this is in contrast with the BART Phase 2 project that takes all funds for the next 10 years. No agencies at the ad hoc committee meeting yesterday were happy with the formula-driven allocations of local streets and roads, bike ped, or highway programs being reduced. And so VTA has much work to do, including the review of finance options to leverage Measure B funds. The ad hoc committee has much work to do prior to VTA drafting the final staff, VTA staff drafting the final budget recommendations this coming February. A report to City Council is scheduled to occur as early as January if there is new information to report. So that's what I have this evening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other staff comments?
No, thank you.
Okay, now we're on to council comments and future agenda items. Let's see, anybody have anything?
Okay, so regarding what I mentioned earlier, the line item funding for historical society, I think we need to talk about what kind of things we would like to see. One possibility would be, since it's not considered a community grant, then it probably they should provide quarterly report to the city, like whenever we do a quarterly budget update, since a budget line item,
Okay,
rather
so
than a one-time annual report.
okay, so you would like to add an agenda item to discuss
Nonprofit funding as a budget
okay,
item.
nonprofit funding is okay.
So
Fair enough.
one thing I think also we could even consider West Valley Community Services as a line item budget, since they do provide essential services to us, and they are not really event driven like a community program. And so that's
okay. Yeah, I think that yeah, I'll be the second to put that on the agenda, or the future mayor can do it.
And then another issue people have mentioned is the naming of library or library rooms, or
naming of buildings. Okay.
Or plaques that will be placed in the library expansion. I think this probably is something we should discuss. It probably shouldn't be determined by the library expansion team. I think the community seems to want a voice on that. Maybe we should talk about it.
Naming of public buildings.
And the donation and recognition strategies for library expansion.
I mean, I'll just point out that we do have a city policy on this. This particular issue has come up in the past, and it took a few years, but then the city formulated a policy. So the starting point would be the policy that we have.
Right, looking at the existing policy. I didn't even know, we never looked at that. Okay. So, John, you look like you want to say something.
Well, yeah, I don't like to interrupt. I would just say that my comment would be that, for like the bird safe and dark sky, I would like to be suggesting that the appropriate commission be offered the chance to come and add their comments in person if they wanted to pick somebody in the future. And it really would be two ways, because here we sent it back for review. They would hear what our comments were and could go back to their commission and share that with, oh, we didn't think about this, or we need to look into that. So I'd like to at least suggest to them that they have the opportunity to come and make statements when their slide is up about their review that they did for a particular agenda item.
Okay, yeah, that's fair enough. It's kind of surprising that they didn't choose to come to speak. Okay, Darcy, did you have anything?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just make a comment about this whole thing about plaquing. I mean, personally, I have no vanity about it, but I mean, I will point out that when former Councilmember Santoro made this comment about not wanting his name on plaques, our city seemed to accommodate that by putting his name on a number of plaques. And in 6 years, I've made expressions of not needing that, and I appreciate the city accommodating that. But I mean, it's look, people put a lot of work into this stuff. So, I mean, if you put their name there, I mean, like, so what? I mean, is that going to make up for the $700,000 or $800,000 of wages that are probably owed us? I mean, very unlikely. I have a question, a follow-up with regard to the request that I had previously that we consider a lobbying registration law. I would like to know what the timetable for having that on an agenda currently is projected to be.
Are you asking that of staff or what? I mean, that is.
Yes,
That-
I'm asking that of staff. Are we looking at that in this calendar year, or are we looking at that sometime next year?
Have
I
to be next
support-
year.
Right, it would be a new work plan item, I would presume, unless you're
Yep.
gonna, unless the new council wants to take something else off the work plan and put that on.
Okay, so it's something that we wouldn't be able to put on unless we made a, so why not put that on in an earlier time when we're putting items on through this mechanism here? I mean, are we gonna be able to, so are you basically saying we need to table that for half a year and then wait until the new work plan is effective? So what would be the?
Well, I mean, I think the agreement was that you don't add an item to the current work plan unless you take some other item that would take an equivalent amount of staff time off.
I see.
I think what we could do is take today's discussion as something you want to add, to Muni code changes. And then I bring it back sometime in January because I do plan on talking to council about the work program and all the other work that's going on in the city. And then you can see the whole thing instead of just this one thing.
Okay, so let me understand what you're saying here. So in January, we would be looking at a list of municipal code changes, which would then be relegated to a future date in terms of the specific changes that would be put in front of us, presumably one at a time. Is that right?
You will get my goal is that in January, I'll help council see all the Muni code changes that have been requested to that date, all of the COVID related work that's been layered onto the cities, all cities, not just us, the completion or the status, I'll put it, the status of the 1920 work program items that weren't finished due to COVID, and then the status of the 2021 work program. And then in that, you can make some decisions about work because I will probably make a recommendation at that time on an approach. So I think we should add this to the list because I think it was not the last council meeting, but the previous. You mentioned it, but you didn't want to quite add it yet. So I assume you have 2 on this to add it, and then we'll consider it on the list.
Oh yeah, no, that night I had 4 people actually that indicated that they wanted. So, okay, well, I guess we can consider it later in the upcoming term in terms of what the timing looks like. So that's good information. Thanks.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, speak now. Okay, so seeing nothing else, it is 10:13. We will adjourn. Thank you, everybody.